from screen to shelf. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of From Screen to Shelf, the podcast about entertainment, physical media, and everything in between, from the silver screen to the palm of your hand. And I am joined, as always, by my two gracious gentlemen colleagues here, Chace and Gabe.
Whole squad today.
Welcome. Yeah, we got the squad back. I
Welcome back, Will.
I missed the last couple of podcasts, but these guys did a fantastic job without me. In fact, it was kind of nice. I watched the videos after the fact and said, yeah, they got it. You know, they're good. You know,
we can hold it down. We know you were busy looking for the Exorcist Believer Steelbook, trying to find a Best Buy that had it. So
yeah, I'm trying to. I'm doing what that guy did with what is it, Weddings, Love, and Other Disasters, where he bought like 500 and something copies of it. I'm trying to do the same thing with Exorcist. Listen, dude, it's just I'm trying to support the art form. You know, you got to keep film alive, and it's just a matter of it's preservation at this point. I mean, it's a movie that needs to be preserved for future generations so they can look back and learn from this time period.
It's going to probably hit the national, like congressional. What is it? The Library of Congress? Yeah,
yeah. Films that are culturally and socially significant. You know, it's important.
Yeah, Peak Cinema sends a sellout.
I mean, dude, I want my grandkids to one day look back and say, "Wow, this is what they enjoyed back then." I mean, this is what was all the rave, you know. So
I don't want them to see it at all.
No, not that one off the shelf. No.
They can watch the first one all they want, and they can, you know, they can see the most gory and violent scene in it, and I'll be fine. But don't watch Believer whatsoever.
Well, fortunately for all our listeners, but not for Chace, we're not going to be talking about Exorcist Believer today. We're going to be talking about the Dune films, David Lynch's film from 1984, as well as the more recent incarnation, the 2021. It was initially scheduled for release in 2020, but as we all know, due to COVID, it got pushed back. But the more recent incarnation by Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures, Dune from 2021. And then we'll get into maybe a little bit of, I guess we could say, like anticipation talk regarding Dune Part Two, which will release in theaters March 1st. Just days away, everybody. Days away, folks.
Yep. We're stoked.
So do either of you guys want to open up for 1984 for David Lynch's film? I just watched it the other day, so I mean it's pretty fresh in my mind. I don't know about you guys. I know, Chace, you were checking it out.
Yeah, it's on right now.
Recently, but yeah, he's got it on his TV. He's actually watching it as we
playing it in the background.
It's on in the background.
Yeah.
I can actually open it up because like the goofiest scene is what's playing right now. I have admiration for this movie just because like camp goofiness. I always appreciate. You know, it's different from what Lynch typically does, but even he's unsatisfied with the end product due to studio interference. He's been on record saying that, like, he doesn't like talking about it. You know, he has better films out there, but it gets brought up a lot. You can definitely tell they wanted this to be Star Wars, even though, you know, Dune was the source material that Star Wars took a lot of inspiration from like the weirding ways and stuff like that. And the goofiest scene is like right now, whenever Patrick Stewart and the lead actor, Paul Atreides, who plays Paul Atreides, are like doing that little duel and they activate their shields and they look like Minecraft characters.
And you can't even see them in the shields. Like,
yeah, it just looks like they're engulfed in solid jello. So it's just really goofy.
You know what it looks like to me too? It looks like SARS from the robot from Interstellar. That's what it reminded me of. Like just the way that the movements were on it too. But yeah, the Minecraft is probably a better description.
It just looks so goofy. Like they didn't want to take the time. But even then, I'm pretty sure there's times in here where they are able to do outlines on people because it happens, you know, but instead they get this goofy, you know, but like they're about to transform and roll out. But no, the other thing is that dude's eyebrows piss me off, like on a whole new level.
Oh man, I hate
Brad
that.
Dourif.
I just need
All
to
the
take a
it's
fucking
the what are they
razor.
called? Hen tats? Is that what they're called? Or
Hen
men tats?
tats.
Yeah, like all their
Oh, the
eyebrows
men
are like
tats.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
men
man,
tats.
it's just golly, man.
Hate
It's
the
just
eyebrows, dude.
it invokes a spirit in me I didn't know was possible every time it shows up on the
With
screen.
the red
'Cause, like,
lips, like all smeared and everything too.
yeah, it's it's just super goofy. But yeah, other than that, I do think the lead actor with what he was given, he does a pretty good job. I mean, of course, then you have Timothy Chalamet that ends up coming out, which we'll touch base on later. It puts
Yeah.
it to shame, but I think for what was presented here, outside of, you know, trying to be a little too Star Wars-esque, I think there's a lot to admire about the movie. I actually do kind of like the final duel whenever it comes to Fade Ralpha and Paul Atreides. I think it's pretty well done. And then whenever he's leading, who are the people in the desert where they
The
become like
Fremen.
the Fremen?
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever he's leading the Fremen and stuff like that, I think there's some good parts in there.
Yeah.
I think the love interest, again, I forget her name. I'm horrible with characters' names, but the love interest that's
Shawnee, I think
prevalent.
is her name.
Yeah, that's prevalent throughout pretty much most of the Dune series. She does a decent job, you know. She plays like that little outcast type of approach really well. His mom does a good job. But other than that, I find the hand part where he puts his hands in the box a little bit goofier in this one. I think 2021 kills it.
Yeah.
But
2021 was much better at
yeah, doing that.
iterating that.
Yeah, like it didn't portray the intense moments really, really well, but also like you can't talk about these movies. I know, Gabe, you're getting close to finishing it. Will, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, you haven't read the books. I've read up
No.
till like I've read all the Frank Herbert ones before his brother took over the series after he passed away.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the books are very politically driven in politics in their world. You know,
Yeah.
like even some of the more action oriented scenes are definitely more drawn out. Like one of the most climactic scenes in the book, right before, you know, the big fight between Fade and Paul, like the whole like the Baron coming down, you know, fuck this planet and stuff like that, the big war. It's
Yeah.
not that long in the book. I'm sure you had to have gone past that part, Gabe, because it's like a third of the way through the book. It's not that long and it lasts pretty short. And
It's like a
even
few
then,
pages,
like,
isn't it?
yeah, it's only a handful of pages. It's very short, but I mean, you've got to draw that out, otherwise people are going to get bored. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, you've got to take that approach. But I think it does that really, really well. Like the biggest, most pivotal part is like the betrayal aspect, and I won't spoil that for anybody that hasn't. Or I mean, this is a spoiler cast, but I don't want to spoil the book because I think the book does it really well. Like whenever he's like, "Oh wow, you're the one that betrayed us," you know what I mean? And I believe in Dune 2021, it touches base on that. This one did it okay, a little bit goofy, a little bit comical, but for the most part, I think for what it was and what it with the studio, I don't want to say what Lynch wanted it to be.
Yeah.
I think it's decent. The practical effects are really good. Whenever it comes to the Baron and everything like that, they do a really good job of portraying him as a slob, everything like that, or the Emperor. To like the set designs, I forget the name of the world, but like the Emperor's ship, where it's a little bit green hued on the 1984 one. I love it. That's one of the things that keeps me coming back to this particular movie. Like that's one of the scenes that's on right now. And it's just really good. It's eye candy to a degree, and especially shout out the Arrow Video 4K transfer. That looks phenomenal.
Yeah. Really good job.
Yeah, and I don't know if either of you guys have said it, but I would love to just throw this out there in case a lot of people didn't know. But check out the documentary for the movie that almost was instead of this, Jodorowsky's Dune. I'm pretty sure I think Scream or Shout put that out. But it goes into how the guy that made Holy Mountain, El Topo, Santa Sangre, he almost made Dune. And oh my, I want to live in the universe where that happened.
Yeah.
Because that would have been
Me too.
Yeah, that would have been crazy.
Yeah. I think it would have been really solid after seeing. I mean, that's the only film I saw was the Santa Sangre one, but I think he could have done a solid job with it. I think the issue.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I think the issue with Lynch's Dune is just, dude. Let me go back to the book. So the book is really hard to adapt, right? Because like a lot of the novel, and Lynch does this is kind of like that inner voice where a lot of the characters are talking to themselves like mentally.
It's out of place.
And it's hard to adapt that onto a film. I think I mean, he does it, and I think sometimes it's okay, but sometimes it's just kind of quirky, just pops out of nowhere. But I think the problem with Lynch's Dune is just it rushes a lot of the material a little bit, and I think that it really doesn't. I don't think it just has the time to kind of absorb and kind of like I think Will or you said like the tension, like the box scene with the hand, like it's kind of campy, it's kind of goofy, it's kind of rushed, and like you really don't get a sense of like what's going on.
Yeah.
So like narratively, I think it's just kind of like quirky and weird. Like you have the inner voice stuff, it's like rushing everything as well.
Mhm.
And you guys know I'm not a big fan of like campiness. Like some of the stuff, like when you see the Baron like freaking like floating, like one
I
scene where
love
they're
it.
I can't. It's so
I love
Yeah.
it.
I will say that some of the I don't know how they did it, but like some of the desert landscape shots, they're actually done pretty well.
Yeah.
Even the scene where the worm kind of devours the harvester. I
Yeah.
like that scene a lot.
Yeah.
And the cast is generally, in my opinion, they did a great job with the material they were given. Like you got Patrick Stewart,
Yeah.
Kyle. I always forget his name, the guy who plays Paul.
Um,
Kyle
Kyle MacLachlan.
Coughlin. You have who else was in this movie? You have quite a bit of standout actors.
Yeah, I mean Brad Dourif,
Yeah,
Linda
Brad
Hunt. You
Dourif.
guys might remember her from Poltergeist. She was the
Yep.
like the medium. Virginia Madsen we talked about before we rolled. Kind
Yeah.
of like a stacked cast, to be honest. If you look at it, Everett McGill, who's been in a lot of David Lynch's stuff. You know, he's been in Twin Peaks. And then I think Shawnee was played by, you may have mentioned it earlier, Gabe, but Sean Young,
Mhm.
who obviously was also famous, starring alongside Harrison Ford in Blade Runner. So
Yeah. I
yeah, the
think that
cast is
the
excellent.
cast is great and like their performances are great. Like I don't have any issue with the performances really. I mean, with the material they were given, it's just
Yeah.
I think either studio interference or I need to kind of delve into the history of it. I don't know how much of it was studio interference or how much of it was Lynch's kind of quirky approach to the screenplay. It's kind of hard for me to tell.
Mm,
I know this is like you guys said, this is like one of Lynch's movies that are kind of like an outlier. This is typically like not really
Mhm.
a representation of what he does, but it's so weird that I have trouble kind of determining like where everything went wrong. And I know that studio interference is brought up a lot, but I mean, he wrote the screenplay prior to the movie coming out, didn't he? Like he wrote an entire
Yeah.
screenplay on his
They just
own.
wanted it to be more like Star Wars. They kept overwriting what he wrote.
yeah.
Like, just due to the
Mm,
success of
so
Star Wars,
okay,
they wanted their own since it was a different studio for that
yeah,
published or from what published. It was Universal. So they wanted, big box office draw, knowing that the source material was very similar because it was very Frank Herbert was very vocal about that at the time, still had admiration for Star Wars.
yeah.
But yeah, I think Frank Herbert, rest in peace, passed away like 3 months after this movie came out.
Oh wow,
Yeah, it
yeah.
was
I
very
mean,
shortly after.
it's I mean, my take on it is like I don't love it to be honest with you guys. Like I don't really like pop it in. I have the Arrow release somewhere on my shelf. And I popped it in for like 40 minutes just to watch it, just to see the transfer. But it's not like a movie that I'm always revisiting. You know what I mean? If anything, I
Yeah.
think that 2021, which we're about to get into, I think it takes a lot more time to kind of flesh things out. And you
Mm,
don't even with the difficulty of adapting the source material with kind of like the inner monologues and everything like that, I think that 2021 does a better job of it. But
Yeah.
I can see why people like 1984. It has a lot of redeeming qualities about it, but it's just not my thing.
Yeah.
What about you, Will? 1984
yeah.
Dune.
There's not much I can follow up with what you guys have already said. I mean, if anything, I guess I'll just kind of add, sprinkle some little tidbits of what I think here and there. Yeah, as far as I'll get into the David Lynch thing first because, and correct me if I'm wrong, this may have been his third feature film. I'm trying to remember what else he put out around that time. I think he didn't do Blue Velvet until 2 or 3 years later because this was '84, and I think Blue Velvet might have been '87.
Yeah.
And
Here it
then
is.
Wild at Heart, and then Twin Peaks into the '90s, and so on and so forth. But Eraserhead, I'm sure came out before this, and then I
And
know he did
Elephant.
The Elephant Man,
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe one other movie. So I mean, I guess we could say by that point he's still a relatively new director in terms of a talent as well. So
Hmm.
to I guess piggyback off of what you said, Gabe, I also question how it came to be what we know as the final product that we have before us, whether or not it was more so David Lynch attempting to approach the source material from however where his point of view was, and how much of that was studio interference, because I tend to believe the studio interference, wanting it to be more like Star Wars, because you could
Mhm.
those references are clear to see, right?
Mhm.
Um, and that's kind of what I noticed watching it. Like, oh, okay, I can see this situation being one where the studios come in and rewrite this because this looks more like something out of the Star Wars universe, which is, I guess I could say, disappointing, because it's one of those things where I agree with what Chace said. I think to see Jodorowsky's Dune would have been interesting, because I feel like we would have gotten a much better product at the end of the day. I just think his vision more so lines up with how I could interpret the Dune universe. And again, coming from somebody who's never read the novels, I'm not as up to speed as the both of you are. So I'm strictly approaching this from a cinematic point of view, right?
Yeah.
I don't have the narrative of the novels to go by. That being said, regarding the narrative structure, I will say the first half of this movie, I think, is much more cohesive. I
Than
think
the
it
last.
falls apart really halfway through is when it starts to kind of lose itself, and then it just kind of becomes a mess from that point on. Now, that being said, overall, I mean, do I enjoy it? I mean, yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's not something I'm going to watch again for quite some time. I also have the Arrow 4K on my shelf, so it's just a movie that I can appreciate for certain aspects, right? I appreciate the special effects, as Chase said. They did a really good job with the practical makeup effects, and even some of the sets, like you were saying, Gabe, like those battle scenes in the desert. I thought those
Mhm.
are really well done. So it definitely has things about it that stand out that I think are done really well. I just think ultimately, um, and to think about the time period that this was released as well, it's not like something like Star Wars where you had 3 movies to kind of tell that story. It'd be interesting to see if they gave him the chance to make multiple films with this universe, because I feel like that's something that obviously the newer films are doing much better. They have that time to let the story really breathe, because it's hard, as we all know, to take a novel or a work like that and try to cram it into an hour and a half, an hour, 40 minutes, 2-hour runtime. It's just,
Yeah.
it's hard to do that. And I think we get a lot of that exposition, which, Lynch and maybe the studio felt was needed to kind of get people to understand what exactly is happening in this world, what's going on with these characters, because there is a lot to pay attention to. Like, there's a lot
Mhm.
going on. There's a lot of different characters in this movie. So, I just think that's something that this film doesn't necessarily accomplish, right?
Yeah.
Like, even in the beginning, we talked about it before we rolled, like the Virginia Madsen, her character kind of
Fading in
giving
and
us
out.
the exposition, and then the fading in and out. I mean, it's funny, but it's, again, like Chase said, it comes across as a bit goofy, a bit quirky.
Mhm.
Like, there's a lot of, I guess we could say, like, that Lynchian melodrama in this movie as well. Not constant, but there's moments of it.
Yeah. Flares up.
And yeah, and that reminds me of something like Twin Peaks, where, not to get into that, but if I can make a reference, like Twin Peaks is a show that it can be incredibly serious at times, and then it just goes into these moments where it's just sheer melodrama, and it's comical and it's
Mhm.
intended. I just think it works better within Twin Peaks, because with that you have a whole series of episodes that you can get familiar with. So it kind of becomes a motif of the show. Whereas with this movie, it's one film. So to
Yeah.
have that kind of thrown in there, and then you have those serious moments, it's almost like I don't think it necessarily works with, the type of story that Dune is. It just doesn't necessarily fit. And there's moments in there, and I talked about it before we rolled, just some goofy stuff that's thrown in there, like Patrick Stewart's character running into battle with the pug in his arms. Like, it's just like, what?
They're
What's
on the
going on
ship with
here?
the dogs. There's a lot of scenes with, like, pugs and, like, dogs. It's kinda weird. It just
Yeah.
kinda throws me off, but I do agree that I said this before we rolled too, that I do think that Lynch does a decent job in setting up some of the world, like, when Paul is actually, I think it's right
Mm.
before Patrick Stewart comes in. I haven't seen it in a minute, but he's, like, sitting down, and he's at the computer and shows the different planets and which house
Yeah, he's
belongs to each
researching.
planet. Yeah, he's, like, researching,
Yeah.
and I'm like, that's actually a good way to kind of at least give some exposition of, like, what this world is. And that's the
Mhm.
and Chase would know more than I do about the books, but, like, this world is just so dense. It's hard to kind
Yeah.
of encapsulate everything within, especially the first novel, within like 2 hours. It's like there's just so
Mhm.
many different like stuff going on with the politics of the world and like the Fremen and the different houses, all these different dynamics. It's a hard book to adapt, and I'm glad that they gave Denis kind of some wiggle room with doing part 1 and part 2, because I think that really, it allows them to kind of flesh out and take a little bit more time in developing the characters and the story too. Because if this was a 2-hour movie, or 2.5-hour movie, I don't think it would have done well. At least with when I'm talking about 21 specifically.
Right.
So
yeah, and we'll get into the Denis film too, Gabe, and that's just to piggyback off of what you said in terms of the narrative, and that's why I felt like Lynch's film really fell apart in that second half, because I just felt like by that point it's like, okay, they got most of what they wanted to get out in the first half regarding the structure, the world building, the political situation that these characters are experiencing amongst each other. And it feels like they're really trying to cram everything in to that runtime, and that's where I feel like it just kind of loses it in that second half. There's just so many things happening, and it can be hard to follow if you're not, really invested or haven't read the books in that case. And I think, and we'll talk about it when we talk about the newer film, but I think Denis' film does a much better job. And again, I haven't read the book, so Gabe or Chace, you guys can kind of probably talk about this a little more in depth. But in terms of the political themes that are present in the books, I think from when I've read and after watching 2021, I think they do a much better job of presenting those themes and setting up those situations. It's just, I think they explain the politics of the world a little bit better than Lynch's film does. So,
yeah, I don't know. Did you guys have any other thoughts about 1984? Because I know we want to get into 2021, which is a much better film to talk.
You just want to just run that conversation.
Yeah, Lynch, I'm sorry, dude. It's like it is what it is with that movie. I'm just not a big fan of it. I appreciate lots of different aspects of it, like you guys said. It's just I just don't feel like, at least from reading the book, it didn't do any justice to a lot of the source material, and it's just kind of quirky to watch.
Yeah, I appreciate it because, like, I mean, it's just like kind of like the hypotheticals about Jodorowsky. Like I think at the time, like because Jodorowsky only has like 5 or 6 different movies. His most recent ones are like autobiographies, because apparently he had a pretty weird and wild. I think I was telling you about this. He had a really weird and wild life. Like, definitely worth checking out those movies. I forget the name of them, but he's releasing it in 3 parts. The 3rd part releases this year. He's already released the first 2, but otherwise he only has El Topo, Holy Mountain, Santa Sangre, and like one other one. So at the time, they were pretty much tit for tat, being known for being like in the weirder side of spectrums. He had, David Lynch had a lot of short films based on the filmography that I was checking out and everything like that. So yeah, it's yeah, I have appreciation for it, because even with the ideas that Jodorowsky had, doesn't mean that the studio wouldn't have been almost made it come out the same. You know what I mean? So
they might have interfered too.
Yeah, exactly. But in a hypothetical world, like if he could still just make exactly what's presented in that, I think it's like 2.5, 3-hour long documentary about it, I would have been super over the moon and happy about that. So yeah, let's go ahead and transition off to Dune 2021. Gabe,
I'm just glad that I'm glad there's still dogs in the year 10,191.
Yeah,
they're still breeding. Yeah, bugs and stuff. I mean, 2021 was an interesting movie because we talked a little bit about it before we rolled. I think it does a really good job of showcasing the world, developing the characters, and introducing a lot of the politics. But even it also does an interesting job at keeping a lot of stuff like ambiguous and in the shadows too. Like, you're introduced to a lot of the politics, but you still, interestingly enough, you don't see the Emperor in part 1. You know what? And I think I kind of liked his approach to that. It's kind of like leaves kind of like this mystery in terms of like what the emperor's doing and his grand scheme and all that. So I think the way Denis did it, he kind of fed us enough to kind of keep our interest engaged with the movie, but he left a lot out as well to kind of reserve for part 2. The only issue, and I think you guys had the same issue with it, Chace, I don't think I've ever talked 2021 with you, so I'd be interested in seeing like what your thoughts were on the ending. But like, I think at least to a lot of people, I think the ending of part 1 was just kind of anticlimactic, and it just kind of ends. It was kind of a weird experience watching it the first time in theaters, where that he has this fight, and then it's over, and
Yeah.
it just cuts to the credits, and you're like, man, I don't know how it almost like it could really impact your perception of the movie as a whole, because you're really not getting like an intense climax, so to speak, which a lot of part ones struggle with. I'm trying to think of like other films that came out as a part one, part two kind of deal. The only one I can think of is like freaking Harry Potter. I don't know any other ones, but like a lot of them do struggle with that kind of like part one, kind of like we can't reach the ultimate peak here. We can't reach that ultimate climax because we're saving everything for part two.
Yeah.
Um, I think he could have done something a little bit differently. I don't know if that was the best place to leave it in terms of part one from reading the book. I think that maybe there could have been another scene he could have used as kind of the climax for that film. But overall, I think everything else about the film is super solid. The performances are great. The cinematography is great. I love the fact that he shot it. I think he shot it in digital and then ran it through some film and then scanned the film to kind of get this like film effect,
Yeah.
which is freaking super interesting as all hell. And I know we're going to talk part two here in a little bit, but with part two, him introducing IMAX cinematography, I think that he's done a great job really kind of building this world and keeping people invested in it. But I think that's my only issue with part one is the ending. And I'm curious, Chase, like what did you think about the ending, like from reading, because you had read the whole book prior to seeing part one, right?
Yeah. It stops
What
like right before the second act really kicks off, if I remember right.
Yeah,
Because I
like
read
it's
these
under the
like
first
in
third, right? Of the
Yeah,
book?
I read these all throughout like the mid 2010s. So like I remember a lot of like the political pinpoints and stuff like that, but that's pretty much it. In regards to the ending, that's the part where he goes like from the trailer, right? Where he
Yeah.
like yeah, okay. So that's how it ends. I mean, I knew there's a part two. It's kind of the way that like it's across the Spider-Verse ends. It's like, of course, like I didn't want it to end the way that it ended, but I knew there was more coming. The only thing that irritated me is I think it was supposed to be a year later, then it became another year, and then it became three,
Yeah, here we
like
are,
it kept coming
2024.
out like a year later. So because they didn't film them side by side because they wanted to see how Dune Part One did. And
Mhm.
then they filmed Dune Part Two, as far as I'm aware. So I mean, yeah, I think that's a good springboard, and that brings a foundation for why Dune Part Two runs what Dune Part One's like 2 hours, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe and a
Yeah, I think
half.
so, like 2.5 hours maybe?
Yeah, because this one's running 3 hours and I think 1 minute
Yeah,
for
2 and
Dune
a is
Part
it
Two.
155 minutes for part one?
Oh wow, yeah,
Yeah, so about two
yeah,
and a
because
half
they have a
hours.
lot of world building in there. Yeah, I mean, I think it was for as good as it is. I mean, it gives you a little bit after like the final battle, and then it keeps you curious because that part right there is where things really springboard, right?
Mhm.
That's whenever like Paul Atreides becomes the Paul Atreides that he is throughout the rest of the books that he's in, right? So as you start going through, I really do think that was probably the perfect part. Otherwise, they probably would have had to make it 3 hours and 15 minutes for the next part to make sense to cut out of it,
Mm.
you know, at least for what it is. And yeah, because Doom Part, yeah, it's over 3 hours. Let me see.
Yeah, Dune Part Two, I think, hits 3 hours exactly from my understanding. I haven't
Two
I
hours and
read that.
46 minutes? Oh, wow. I thought it
Oh,
was
for
three and a
part 2?
half. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. I thought it was over. Okay.
Let me see, it's
Nice.
saying okay, yeah,
Nice.
167. I thought it was, like, just at 3 hours.
Yeah, same. So I mean that's pretty healthy, and because otherwise, yeah, this one would have had to have been shorter, and then that one would have had to been about 30 minutes longer for the next
Mhm.
part to make sense. Otherwise, you just would have been absolutely blue balled with where they had to, because that's where the rest of the movie just
I mean, to be honest,
goes.
I felt blue-balled. Like, left it off.
Yeah,
Like, and like, where it's going, so you have a different kind
yeah,
of perception, but me going into the movie, I hadn't read the book at the time. I
yeah,
felt blue-balled. I'm like, it just cuts, and it's, like,
yeah,
over. And I don't know, I
yeah.
saw Will kind of nodding his head. Did you have the same experience, Will? Were you kind of like, "What the hell? Why did it just
Yeah, I'm
end?"
with you. Yeah, I'm with Gabe because again, as I said, I'm not approaching this from having read the novels. I'm approaching it simply as a moviegoer, just for the cinematic experience. And yeah, it was kind of, I don't know, just felt a little. I felt like there could have been a little more of a finality to it than there was. I just think
Yeah.
that, but that, I mean, that's really the only thing about it that was kind of the only thing I didn't like, I guess, was how they ended it. I just
Mhm.
not even that I necessarily think it's a bad ending, because again, if you read the books, as Chace was saying, obviously you can understand why they made that editing choice, why they chose to go that route. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think cinematically it doesn't necessarily give you as much of the payoff that you were hoping for. So, and that's my take on that, at least. But
So let me ask you
yeah,
guys this: if Dune Part Two picks up well from that point and finishes it well, will the ending be better for you, knowing that it's a two-parter? Will
it's a
you
good
look at it
question.
differently? You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
if it cohesively ties it together, right? With what I'm saying, which I think you guys will. I think from that point, because like it
Yeah,
really springboards from that point, right?
yeah.
I think you guys might look at it differently, unless like 5 hours of adventure isn't necessarily your thing, but it'll become one cohesive unit. Do you think if you get that takeaway from there and understand why they dropped off at that point, because they could have dropped at a different point, the movie just would have had to either be
Hmm.
they probably would have had to either end, which nobody would have liked Dune Part One if it ended right before like the whole raid of Arrakis and stuff like
mhm.
that. If it didn't
Right.
show that, people wouldn't have been happy.
Oh, people would have
I
been
don't yeah,
pissed.
I don't think we would have gotten a part 2, even though the movie still would have been good. So you would have either had to have ended it right before that or gone a little bit further past where they did end it. And of course the
I
movie's gonna pick up from there.
I think that this is just me, because I mean,
Yeah.
I think that I still would judge these movies individually, like,
Okay.
and I it's weird, man. It's hard to kinda describe. It's almost like, trying to think. I mean, the only one I can think of is Harry Potter off the top of my head, Part 1, Part
Mm,
2, and I actually love both of those films. I think they did a solid job because I'd read the
Yeah.
books too, but, like, Part 1, even when you watch it now, it's still almost like the Dune kind of thing where it's like it doesn't reach this, like, climax. It's like you can tell there's gonna be a big climax, but it just cuts off, and
Yeah.
even when I retrospectively watched that movie knowing the ending and having seen Part 2, I'm still kind of like, "Man, this is still like a blue ball kind of feeling, like,
Yeah.
when you watch it." So, I don't know. I mean, but it'd be interesting too, kind of, because I heard he might do a part 3 with, like, the 2nd book.
Messiah.
So yeah, Messiah.
He
So I
has
don't
to.
know, like, you know what I mean? It's gonna be kind of like a weird fluctuation of, like, part 1,
Yeah.
part 2, part 3, and I don't know at this point, like, if he should just leave this as, like, part 1, part 2 for the first one and then just call the 3rd one something else, because
It will.
it's
It has
yeah,
to be
because
because it's set
it
way after.
yeah, so, like, it's just kind of like a weird fluctuation, but at least for me, I still would judge these kind of individually.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, Star I mean, like, even though Star Wars is a bad example, because obviously it's, like, one cohesive story as a trilogy, the original trilogy, I still go back and look at those films individually, and I can say, like, Return of the Jedi isn't as good as, the
Yeah.
first 2 were, even though I know what the whole cohesive story is, so, that's just me, though.
Oh, so I'm not the only one that doesn't like Return of the Jedi as much as the other 2. Okay.
I think that's a mass consensus.
Oh, really? I usually get shit on for that idea, but
Really?
yeah. Yeah, dude,
really?
I really don't care
Weird.
much for Return of the I actually like the Ewok and Battle of Endor on a different tangent, but I just don't think it's as big of a payoff as it could have been. I think Empire Strikes Back would have been a almost better ending, you know what I mean, than
Mhm.
Return of the Jedi. Because I don't know, Luke kisses his sister. But anyways, back to Dune. But back to Dune. So like, yeah. Well, how do you feel about that question that I posed to you? Do you agree
I
with Gabe or do you
agree.
feel differently?
I'm No, I'm with Gabe. I mean, I have to look at them as individual films,
Yeah.
because let's just put it this way, and I always try to approach it from this standpoint regarding whether it's trilogies that pick off, or pick up right after the other. If we
Yeah.
never got a second movie, hypothetically speaking,
Mhm.
Yeah.
then
Which was a possibility.
which
Yeah.
was about, yeah, well, yeah, in this
Especially
case,
during
it could
COVID,
almost
yeah.
it may have not happened, right? So, yeah, I have to look at it from that point of view, is like, if we never got a part 2, does that first film end, is it a satisfying climax? And no, I don't think it was. I do think it fell short. So now, I mean, if I'm watching them back to back, literally, then okay, I guess I can see that making more sense. But even then, like, I would still want more of a satisfying finale for the
No,
first film.
Mhm.
I
And
can
I
see
would
that.
feel that way about, and again, that's more of like a general approach of how I look at that kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, and that happens all the time. I mean, there's certain films that come out and you watch it knowing that, okay, if this does well, they're definitely going to have a sequel, which is why things happen the way they do. But even then, I mean, even as I think a director or whoever's putting the movie out as a studio, you want that first film to be a cohesive, I just feel like you have to have a sense of finality. You have to have some kind of climax, some kind of payoff, regardless of whether or not there's going to be a second installment. So yeah, I feel the same. I think I'd still look at it that way.
Yeah.
And it's a
knowing that there's
weird
second
it's a weird dynamic though too, because we're not just talking about like a second installment sequel. We're talking about like a part two to the same
Literally
story, right?
continues.
So like
Yeah.
so like
story. Yeah.
it's hard to kind of compare it to like, because I was thinking mentally while you were talking, well, I'm like Godfather Part One and Part Two. I mean, I
Mhm.
think those are two different books though, but it does a good job. Like whereas Part One has its own kind of story that's separate, and but then
Yeah.
Part Two has its own story that's separate, but it's like one common thread throughout.
Yeah.
um, I think that those films did a fantastic job doing that, but this is like one book.
Exactly.
But you know what? Lord of the Rings was one book technically. I know it's split up in terms of like, Fellowship, Two Towers, and Return of the King, but that was one book too. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I
Just
think
titled
each of those
differently.
just titled differently, and each of those films had a really good climax, you know what I mean?
That's
That
fair.
transitioned into the next installment really well. So, and then the other complaint, which I don't know, a lot of people don't talk about this, but Zendaya, Shawnee is like barely in Part One, which
Yeah.
is
It's because of
yeah,
that's
like where
why
they
like
left it off, and it's kind of
she's
weird
a
though because
lot
you
more
see
prevalent.
her,
Yeah.
you see flashes of her in the dreams and stuff, and you're like
Yeah.
intrigued, and you want to see who this character is, and then like you hear her talk like one sentence, and then the movie's over, and it's kind of like,
Yeah.
well, crap, I didn't really get to see who she was or who the Fremen are. Really, I know that second film's gonna dive deep
Much
into
more.
that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dive into it.
Just
Yeah.
the whole
but
yeah.
it's like I guess Lord of the Rings is a good example because that is one book separated into three different parts. And I feel like they adapted that in a way that was, you had a good climax for each installment that transitioned into the next installment really well.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I still have to finish the book to kind of make a good judgment if where
Yeah.
Denis. I mean, but Denis has read this book from what he said like multiple times. You know what I mean? Like he's a
Yeah.
huge fan of this book. So I mean, I trust his judgment. You know what I mean? If that's where he thought it needed to end, that's where he ended it. But this is a hard
Yeah.
book to adapt.
It really is, especially because it's not a big book or like
Mhm.
as big as some of the other ones. It still is, it's a hefty boy for sure, but it's not as big as some of like the other guys that have been adapted. But I think that's a fair thing to put in there whenever it comes to Lord of the Rings, because it is one cohesive story. Like you can, like I just turned it on. I didn't know whenever I was younger, it was on cable. I watched part of what's the third one, Return of the King.
Yeah.
I had seen like the middle half of that one, was super confused, but I still had a lot of fun with it. And then I think just last year I finally watched all three of them. I'd seen Fellowship a few years ago, but I just finally watched all three of them on the extended editions. And it's a
Mhm.
really solid journey. And I can definitely understand your take on that. I guess it's the way that like what was it? Mockingjay was the third Hunger Games movie,
Oh,
and
that's
then
another good example. Yeah, the
yeah,
part one, part two,
and then
Mockingjay.
your Harry
Yep.
Potter example, like, Hollywood has gone from like, okay, whenever we start getting to a certain runtime or over 3 hours, we've got to make it, if you want something else, we've got to make it into two parts for financial reasons, for budgetary reasons and stuff
Mhm.
like that. It's kind of like Avatar 3 and 4. Avatar or not 3 and 4, 2 and 3 were shot side by
Mhm.
side. Avatar 3
Yeah.
is completely done. Avatar 2 made enough money where 3 is nothing but pure profit. Well,
Yeah.
as soon as it comes outside of advertising. Well, I mean, even still, it's probably still pure profit. You know what I
Oh, yeah,
mean?
the way those films perform.
Yeah, but they're not parts 1, 2, and 3. Like Avatar 2 doesn't pick up directly after.
Mhm.
I literally feel like it's again like for people that have read the books. I'd assume at least probably a good chunk of the people, not everybody that's tuning in, has read at least some of the book or anything like that.
Hmm.
But I really do find it to be a really good springboard. It all makes
Mhm.
sense. Like the complaints, like whenever this movie was coming out, all made sense to me. I was like,
Yeah.
well, if we get a part two, all of those complaints, it's kind of like Across the Spider Verse. I said the same thing. I despised how it ended because like
Mhm.
it felt like it was just it. Across the Spider Verse had these waves where it felt like it was constantly. It's like have you guys have played the first Red Dead Redemption where it feels like it's going to end like 4 or 5 different
Yeah.
times and then it keeps going? That's how Across the Spider-Verse felt for me, and then I didn't want it to end like that third or fourth time I felt like it
Mhm.
was going to end for the part 2. You know what I mean? But I feel like I'll appreciate it a lot more whenever the part 2 for Across the Spider-Verse comes out, whenever that does, as one cohesive 5-6 hour long film. because that's the way that I approach these. Of course, I'm not going to sit down and watch 12 hours of Lord of the Rings and judge it that way, because that's a very fair argument on your end. Like, very climactic, and it really hits the nail on the head. That's very fair. I just think the way that movies have kind of changed, knowing that there's a part 2 versus probably around the time Lord of the Rings came out, you had your fans, but those movies really springboarded that into a different type of fandom and, popularity from Peter Jackson himself versus what J.R.R. Tolkien already had established, right? Those are just a whole new level of popular now after those movies. So that's the way I'm going at it, because a lot of the complaints I hear make sense. It's like those will be answered in part 2, but it was completely fair. Well, what if we don't get a part 2? Well, then I probably would have been in the same boat. Yeah, it just kind of sucks how it ends, but at least we got the battle. At least we got the battle scene would have been my cope. You know what I mean?
I think that some of...
Oh,
go ahead, Will.
No, I was just going to say regarding the ending, I mean, most people that have not read the books are probably going to come away with that kind of reaction because, again, most people who go to the movies, they're just going to see a movie, right? They might not necessarily be even fans of the book. They may not even know that books exist, right? I mean, to some degree or another. So, I try to look at it like that too. It's like, okay, I understand that it works in the context of the novels. It works in the context of the books, but most people, or a large majority of people, they're not looking at it through that context. They're looking at it as whether or not it works as a feature film. So,
So do you think, let me pose this question to you guys, because I would argue, so like if you look at like the analogy I use with like Lord of the Rings, right? Like the way part 1 ends in the book, it's not like a huge climax the way it's kind of written. You know what I mean? But I think the way Peter Jackson the way they adapted it, it was kind of like a climax. And I'm wondering if Denis could have done maybe something to spice up the fight between him and I forget the guy's name, I forgot the guy's name that he fights, Paul.
It's not Jarvis, is it?
Jarvis. I was about to say Jarvis, but it sounds wrong. Like I'm like thinking Jarvis. Of like Marvel. Yeah,
something. Call him Jerry.
Jerry. He fights Jerry, right? So, but like I as a filmmaker, knowing that this is the end of the film, I'm wondering, do you guys think that maybe he could have done something to spice that fight up, right? Because like obviously as a filmmaker, you're not adapting directly from the book as much as we want to, because there are some elements from a book that just don't translate to film. So I'm wondering if he could have done something to spice that battle up, maybe bring more people or bring Paul to kind of like, where the Fremen are. And I mean, that would be different from the book, but and hold the battle there just to kind of make it more of a grand spectacle and then kind of like end part 1. Do you guys think that he could have done something like that?
Yeah. I actually so I was absolutely going to say that to a degree, yes and no, right? So, but then I started thinking while you were talking that whole time, he completely beefed up the entire battle scene, like the invasion scene of Arrakis, for the spice and everything like that. Because, I mean, it's just like we said, it's very short, very, very short in the book. And then it gets right back to the politically motivated part of the movie. So, I mean, because I would say, no, you really can't, because then people would be like, no, you know what I mean? No, you changed the book too much. Because even like really good stuff, people tend to say that about, even whenever it's actually warranted, it's kind of like the Shining movie's good, but then everybody tells you the Shining book is better. When that's awesome. I admire that you like the book, right? But then you take a lot of creative freedoms, and then people are going to have problems with it that are fans of the source material. But then I believe in Denis. He's never missed.
No, for sure. So he's one of my favorite directors out right now. I just think, if I'm looking at it critically as a director, I think that maybe, you could, and who knows, maybe he saw it, and when he was filming that ending, he was kind of like, this is like a climax to me. You know what I mean? Like, Paul's here, and this is kind of like what you said, Chace. This is like, that point, the springboard point where he's going to be different in part 2. So maybe when Denis was filming that, he saw it as like a climax, but it maybe just didn't translate that well when it actually came out. And honestly, I think we just focus on the ending so much, because everything about this movie, at least 2021, everything else is fantastic. Like, I loved everything else about 2021. I think the performances were great. The special effects were great. The cinematography was great. The world building was freaking phenomenal. It's a freaking outstanding movie. And I'm excited for part 2. I mean, what are you guys looking forward to in terms of like watching part 2?
Can I really even talk about that? Because
I mean,
you
no
know what I mean.
spoilers. Yeah,
I
don't.
can't. You know, it's just
Yeah,
like,
you're gonna
yeah,
get
you know
into
what I mean. Like because everything that like I'm hearing you guys like I'm over here like you know like Zendaya
Yeah.
not being in it much, you know the Fremen and stuff like that. Like we're gonna get all that, you know, like that.
Yeah,
That's the whole
I
build
already
up
got
to
a taste
make
of
you
that
want
from
it.
the book. But I mean, like, what
Yeah.
about like just as like a moviegoer? Like, what about like when the
Oh, I'm
trailers
looking
you've
for the
seen and
Austin Butler.
oh, for
He's a
sure.
fucking phenomenal actor, man.
yeah, great
Yeah.
actor.
Him as Fade Rautha. I'm looking forward to more of the Emperor based scenes because those were
Mhm.
kind of
Yeah.
a little absent because he has his own chapters throughout
Mhm.
throughout the book, and those are some of the most powerful moments in the entire book whenever the dialogue. So I'm just looking forward. I think Dave Bautista is playing. Is he playing the Baron or is he playing the Emperor?
No, Dave is the other
He
nephew, the other
yeah.
Baron's
Oh,
nephew.
okay.
Oh
It's
God, what's his
Christopher
name?
Walken, isn't it?
Christopher
Stellan
Walken is the
Skarsgård.
Emperor.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah,
cool. I want to
but,
see it.
you guys mentioned the Baron. Is his name Stellan Skarsgård? He's,
Yeah, I can never say his freaking name. He's a
he
fantastic
plays
actor.
he plays the Baron. I will say real quick, I think they did a much better job with the Baron. Like, Gabe, you were talking about in the Lynch film, it's just kinda goofy how he floats around.
Yeah,
I
he's
thought it was
just
Yeah,
actually kinda creepy how they do it in this one, how they introduce him. I thought that was really well
yeah.
done.
It's
yeah,
very kind of subtle, just kind of like I mean, like in Lynch's, it's just he's just fat and like floating around, zipping around. And this one, it's kind of like
Yeah.
you really get a sense of like his like overpowering presence. You know what I mean? And he's just kind of like floating like ever so lightly, and it's just done a lot better. But yeah, Christopher Walken as the Emperor, I think that's like the most genius casting because I would never have thought about Christopher Walken as the Emperor.
yep.
And I mean, you have more Shawnee with Zendaya. You have I can never say the princess's name. Florence Pugh is playing Princess. Is it
Irulan,
Ruin? I
Irulan.
know Irulan, which
Mhm.
I'm excited because she's a fantastic actress. Um, I mean, yeah, you get a lot more with this one, and at least from what I'm seeing in the trailers, and from what I've heard Denise saying is like I think correct me if I'm wrong. I think he filmed most of this movie with IMAX or all of it with
Wow.
IMAX. It could be all of it.
And that's what's
Um,
yeah, I know you're excited for that because
oh
I'm gonna go
god,
see it in
dude.
Dolby. You're gonna
I
go
mean,
IMAX, and
I
Will, you're
s-
standard, right?
Well, I don't know yet. I'm gonna
Oh,
see.
okay.
I mean,
Okay.
if I can get an IMAX showing, I would prefer to see it in IMAX.
Yeah.
I think that's gonna be a much better experience, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I would rather see it in IMAX, no
yeah.
question. So,
Dude, I
I'm
mean, at
probably
least
gonna
the
actually
few
look
minutes I
today.
saw of the Dune Part Two, like they showed 5 minutes during the Tenet reissue, and it looks freaking phenomenal in IMAX, dude. Like it just has so much. You can tell like he's like looking for scope, at least just with
Yeah.
the one scene that I saw. So like,
Mm,
I think that's going to add a lot to the movie. Yeah, I mean, it just looks like a bigger scope, bigger, and this is where all the action and obviously the climax of the whole story happens. So, I can see, and people have already come out with their not reviews, but like reactions from seeing part two, and it sounds like
mm.
it's way better than part one in every way from what people have said. So, um, I'm excited for it, man. It should be a solid movie.
Is there anything we wanna talk about? Because I mean, we really kinda talked about the ending of part 1. We spent a lot of
Mhm.
time on that. Is there anything else that you guys wanna mention about the 2021 film that you thought was really well? I mean, from anything else in the movie, like, I mean, I thought yeah, most of it
Rebecca
was VFX.
Ferguson. I like Rebecca Ferguson. I don't. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm for real. No, I think that she really does a good job in that movie as the
Mm.
as Paul's mother. I think that
Yeah,
she
Lady Jessica, right?
yeah, like I think like she portrays a lot more of like kind of the inner conflict. That's
Mm.
what's going on with the story, and she's great in everything that she's in, Rebecca Ferguson. So I think that she does a great job, and also our
Mhm.
boy Oscar Isaac. I
Oh,
forgot to
yeah.
mention him. With the brief screen time he got, I think he did a fantastic job too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Oscar
the
Isaac's
cast is
great.
pretty well rounded too. I mean, even Jason Momoa, like for the roles that he usually plays, I felt that his character, like he was played just right. Like
Hmm.
everybody really, even though they have minimal screen time here and there, it's uh I don't know. I feel like Denis as a director, like sci-fi is his genre.
Yeah.
He just blows it out of the park. Most of his films that I've seen are just phenomenal. So I mean, if there was one person to direct these movies, they made the right choice with him. I just think there's really, as I said, overall, other than the ending, there's really nothing else about this that I can, say anything negative about. I mean, the
Yeah, because
visuals
everything
are
else is so
fantastic.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
The
just shot so
worms.
well. The
the worms
worms.
are cool.
And
Yeah.
I don't know why I just thought about the popcorn bucket for
Oh God. Oh
for
boy.
part 2. Chase
Aren't
will
those
probably buy
exclusive
that.
to sex shops, right? They don't actually sell them at AMC. They're exclusive to sex shops.
Oh, are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I think some
What?
people
So Warner Brothers, they have an official advertising partnership with Amazing Superstore or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
that did throw me off when I saw it, though. I'm like, I don't know who I mean, either it was genius marketing or it was like the dumbest mistake that
Yeah.
just turned into a viral phenomenon because that
Yeah.
bucket just looks atrocious. It looks really, really bad. But yeah, I mean, well, it's hard to it part one. I love everything about part one. It's just a
Mm.
phenomenal movie. So like that, I guess that's why I focus on the ending so much because that's my only like gripe with it.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't really change anything about part one. Maybe just a little bit more exposition at the beginning, I guess, is maybe something
Mhm.
else maybe I would change. Kind of, I think Lynch does a good job, like I said, where he sets Paul up and he's doing research, and I Denis does a similar thing, but I think Lynch does a really good job at setting up the planets, the universe,
Yeah.
the dynamics between the houses. So with Denis, you're kind of learning as you go along, but.
Mm.
I think he killed it. I think he honestly did a fantastic job, and that boxing that Denis did with the Ben H. Ezra. I think that scene's freaking fantastic. Just
Mm.
the lighting and the set design, all that stuff, and it's not as corny as Lynch's, where you're seeing the hand
Mhm.
actually, burning up inside the box. I
Inside
like
the
the
box
mystery
there.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but fantastic movie.
Sound
Yeah, I
design. We gotta
agree.
shout that out.
Oh, yeah, the
Oh
sound design's
yeah,
crazy.
really good. And you're seeing, I
Sound
think you're
design's
seeing
amazing.
part 2 in Atmos, right, Chase?
Fuck yeah. Dolby all the way. Always. Every single time, bro.
I'm gonna try and
Always.
see it a second viewing in Atmos because I'm just conflicted. I'm always about that IMAX cinematography, but I want to see what he does with the Dolby Atmos. It should be pretty
Yeah.
solid,
I'm
especially with the
always a
final
bigger
battle.
sucker for the sound, always. Overheads and like, Will, have you been to Dolby? I know Gabe, you have.
Yeah,
No, I don't. It's weird. I don't have one for like hours. It's like hours
Damn.
away.
damn, that
Yeah, it
That
sucks.
sucks, man.
sucks.
It sucks. Yeah.
Dude, they have I'm almost positive either that or like the one sub, and because of the way that it is and it's set up behind you, I'm almost positive they have individual subwoofers underneath or very,
Mm.
very closely spacely, like, dude, because there's just times like the part in Morbius, man, I'll never forget whenever he goes like, the Morbin time scene, and then he like, he like jumps up, just the way it rattled, man.
Yeah.
That's why I had such a good time with Morbius, and then Sonic, that one was good. Night Swim, believe it or not, it had
Mhm.
its moments. Saw in Dolby was pretty cool.
I only saw the
Um,
Batman in Dolby. The problem with
oh,
my
that was
Dolby
it.
is that it's far as hell. It's like 40 something minutes away from me. So
Damn, that's just a little
yeah,
road
so
trip.
yeah, it's not that bad.
Yeah,
Yeah, I complain. People have way worse, but for me, I'm spoiled here. Like everything's so close. So,
yeah.
but I mean,
Will's over
40,
here like,
but
I wish it was 40.
yeah. But I saw the Batman in Dolby, and I just always remember the freaking the
Batmobile.
Batmobile scene, dude. That
Yep.
that thing starting up, I was like, holy crap, this sounds amazing. But
Yeah.
it's fucking loud, man. Dolby is
Yeah.
loud. Some
Yeah.
people actually complain about it. I think my buddy
Yeah.
was saying that he felt like it was too loud.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting seeing part 2 in Dolby for sure.
Oh, yeah. And we'll give you our thoughts here first.
Yeah, so we're
The
gonna do a
round table.
review, right? Next weekend, we're doing a
Mhm.
Dune Part 2 review. We're gonna try
Yeah.
and post it as soon as we all see it because I think we're all seeing it at different times. But
Mm.
we're all stoked for it, and it'll be interesting seeing everyone's take on it because I think Will, you said maybe conventional or IMAX if you can see it. I'll be seeing it in IMAX.
Yeah, I'm looking to see what's near me because I'm actually finding out that they do. I guess Dolby Cinema does a partnership with AMC, which is a big
Yeah,
chain around here. So I'm trying to see if there's one closer because, dude, it'd be awesome to see it in Dolby. I mean, if not, though, I'm probably going to go for IMAX because IMAX is pretty close to me. It's like 35 minutes, which is great. So,
yeah. I mean,
but
just I
yeah,
mean,
definitely.
most people are just gonna be excited to see it in general.
Yeah.
Whatever format. I mean, and I think this is probably going to be the biggest movie, box office wise, of the year. I think this is the one that everyone's been waiting for. and it's dead right now at the movies. There isn't, as far as I'm concerned, there's no other movies playing that are garnering a lot of different buzz right now. So,
Madam Web.
Yeah, dude, Will was telling me about that, and it sounded so good. I bought tickets. I
bro,
might go see it after this.
you guys, I don't know.
By the end of our conversation, he was already like, cha-ching.
I can't with that. The trailers just
Bought
look
the tickets.
so bad. And then when you said like it makes Morbius look like The Dark Knight, I think Will had sent that text, and I'm like, I'm definitely not watching this movie
He
because
ran
Morbius.
to the theater.
Oh my god, dude, Morbius is so bad. I can't. I don't like Morbius. I know Chace probably liked it, right? Because
It
very
was my first
2000.
Dolby.
Yeah, it was like 2000, like early 2000s camp, kind of
Yeah.
superhero camp. I got almost like Daredevil vibes with it.
Yeah.
Like Ben Affleck Daredevil vibes with it, but yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not catching Madam Web anytime soon.
But see, and I was telling Chace this yesterday, Gabe. The thing with Morbius is that although it's horrible, it's still enjoyable. You know,
Yeah.
there's
some
a
fun
goofiness
aspects
to it. Yeah, you can still enjoy it. And Madam Web, unfortunately, is it's just impossible to really take anything away from it other than just questioning why anybody thought that it was passable. You know, even for what it is, it's just, I don't know, just a weird movie to put out there.
Yeah.
So,
any other
Yeah, not
thoughts
bad.
on Dune, guys? On David
gonna say,
Lynch,
any
Part
closing
1,
thoughts?
Part 2, closing thoughts? I think we pretty much said everything we wanted to say. I think we're all stoked for this Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whenever we're seeing it. But yeah, this is going to be my most anticipated movie of the year. So hoping it's solid. And I think that we'll be doing some versus videos in between, maybe. I think in between.
Yeah, do you guys want to talk about what you got? Because I know you guys are going to do a versus video. Do you guys want to plug any of that right now and let people know?
Yeah,
what
we're
you have
doing.
planned?
I think you correct me if I'm wrong, Chase. So you're doing. You just saw Big Lebowski, and I'm doing The Sacrament, right? Is that the one that we lined up?
No, it was. I mean, you can do because you ended up watching both of the ones. You gave me 10, and I gotta like space out my mind and my time. And
That's the
everything
one
to-
I wanted you to see too, man. Just because I want to see what you think about that
If
movie.
I
'cause
understand
it's
it.
so quirky and weird. Yeah, it's if you understand it too, because I know a lot of people don't understand it the first time they see it.
Yeah, no, I ended up watching. I finished. I literally had the credits rolling right whenever I joined with Will, because
For
I had
Big
a lot to
Lebowski
do.
or Tenet?
Yeah, no, Big Lebowski, because I was watching it on my phone to finish it. Because I only had like 20 minutes left, and I had a lot of fun with it, which we'll talk about. But yeah, you were issued When Evil Lurks and The Sacrament. So whichever one you want to go up against Big Lebowski, whichever one you're more burning from the soul to talk about.
Both. I have thoughts on both.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll plug in some of those videos, and I don't know if you guys have any pickup videos or any other videos you're doing during the week.
We got Darkman, and we have a. No, that one's live already. No.
Yeah, Darkman's live. By the time this
okay.
drops, Darkman will be live for a couple days. We got trailer reactions. We'll probably do some more trailer reactions.
Yeah,
Gabe, we can try to do some of those with you too, because I think it'd be interesting to have three of us kind of react to trailers.
Sure.
So that's something we're going to get into more. You know, I mean, yeah, it's weird. We were talking about it before. It's been kind of dry, like on the physical media front for the last several weeks. You know, nobody's really, other than a few releases here and there, there's not a lot of stuff that people are really not necessarily excited about, just not much going on. So
yeah, it's just kind of dead recently. So we're just kind of being creative with some of the content we're putting out. And I think we're going to be doing I was going to do maybe a retrospect review on Tenet since I just saw it yesterday in IMAX, but we might be doing some of those too. I think Chace and I were talking about doing some more retrospect reviews on like older movies. Because I think right now, interestingly enough, it is so dead that people are going back and just watching a lot of like older movies that they missed and giving feedback on that. So I think we can do some of that as well. But I think that's everything we have lined up for you guys. So we will catch you guys next week. I think the next time you see us, we will have seen Dune Part 2.
Dune Part 2.
Yes, and I'm super stoked. The echo. You should petition Denis to put that in the opening title sequence, like right when it says Part 2, just have your voice in the background.
It's Part 2. I actually can do a pretty good trailer voice, I think.
I think so too, man. You should try it out. You already got the
You know,
baseline. for it.
Chace was not a believer until he saw the David Gordon Green film.
That would be great.
Oh
Yeah.
man, we got to maybe have a Will like redo like an old movie trailer. And
Yeah, just
revoice
silence it.
Yeah.
Just talk
Take up
over
the
it. Yeah.
narration.
All right, guys. Well, as always, please like, subscribe, comment down below. Let us know your thoughts on 1984 David Lynch Dune and Dune Part One, and what you're excited for Dune Part Two. And we will catch you guys next time. Take it easy, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
From Screen to Shelf will return.